All right, guys. So today we are going to look at a little bit about decimals. We're going to look at how to change a fraction to a decimal using your calculator, so don't freak, and you've already seen this key before. And we're also going to talk about something that is a perennial problem that makes no sense. That's rounding. If you will listen closely to what I say and then do this every single time, then rounding is not an issue. You will never, ever, ever stop rounding. Okay? So you need to, if you don't know how to do it effectively now, then you need to learn how to do it effectively because it's never going to go away. Okay? So the first thing I want to do is just introduce you to another function of a key on your calculator that you might have seen before. I think we've used it before. And that is that key that says S and then two arrows, then a D. If you have one of the bigger white graphics calculators, it'll say, I can't remember which one's one. One of them has an SD and the other has an F to a D. Which one does your calculator have? SD, okay. And your calculator has FD. So this one's a little more explanatory than SD because what it means is fraction to decimal. But this is the same key, just different versions of the calculator use different letters for some reason. Now, notice that the arrow goes both ways. That means if you push it one way, if you push it once, it'll change a fraction to a decimal. If you push it again, it'll change it back. So it's just going to go back and forth all the time. So what I want you to do, guys, is I want you to enter 1/2 as a fraction. Do not put it as division. Write it as a fraction. Enter that as a fraction. Then hit your SD key and tell me what it equals. 0.5, which you knew because you know that 1/2 equals 0.5. Yes? Okay, find it? Okay. So we used that SD key before with a shift function to be able to write improper fractions or something. I can't remember what we did use it for, but something. All right. So do this one for me. Do 1/3, then SD, and tell me what you get. 0.333. Yeah, 0.333, and it keeps on doing threes forever, right? Now there's another notation for that, and that is putting 0.3 with a little bar over the 3, and that tells you that 3 is repeating forever. Or you might see it as 0.3 with a little dot over the top. Okay? All of those things mean the same thing. It means that 3 is repeating. And this is called a repeating decimal. Right? You've seen those before. And you usually get it when you have a multiple of 3 in the bottom. 3, 9, 27, anything that divides by 3 usually gives you that case. Okay? All right. So that part shouldn't be very strenuous for you. If you want to change a fraction to a decimal, just hit the what? SD key. Okay? If you want to change it back to a fraction, what? Hit it again, right? So enter 0.25 for me, and then hit the SD key. There you go. You should have gotten 1/4, yeah. All right, so easy peasy, change it back and forth. Normally what you'd have to do is you'd have to use long division to change those. But for now, for this section, now you're going to learn some calculator keystrokes to be able to do those. All right, so the big lesson today, though, is the second part of this. This is just, but you do need to practice and make sure you know that key, because I am not going to later tell you when we're doing operations with fractions, with decimals, how to change a fraction into a decimal, right? You need to make sure you practice enough to remember it. The big thing we're going to talk about today is rounding. Now, if we're going to talk about rounding, the first thing we have to do is talk about place value. And this is not hard. It's something you should have seen since the minute you started learning about numbers. But our numbers in our system, the system that we use, always are defined, the value of them is always defined by their place. The base we use, so let's say I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Who cares? Like God forever. And I'm going to put a little decimal right there in the middle. Okay? The base that we use is called the units, also known as the ones place. Now, so that 4 means we have 4 ones. But if I say units, you also know that means that first place right next to the decimal. Remember this? If we move 1 over, that's the tens place. So there are 3 tens, in other words, 30, right? The 2 is in the, hundreds place. And finally, the 1 is in the thousands place, right? And you could go on to 10,000s, 100,000s, etc. For there, they could just get bigger and bigger and bigger. But what do you notice about all of those words? What was the letter at the end? Thousands, hundreds, tens, ones. It's an S always. So anytime you see a number place that ends with S, you know you're on the left-hand side of the decimal, bigger than 1, or 1 or bigger. Okay? Now, on the other side, okay, again, this is our base, or units. That one always, that's the, everything is base. But if you see the decimal, on the other side of the decimal, you get tenths. So this time it ends in THS. And that tells you that it's not a whole number, it's a decimal, right? It's on the left of the decimal. The 6 is in the what? Hundredths. It's just a mirror image of what we've done a while ago, but you're going to have the THS to tell you it's on the other side. Sevenths is in the thousandths, which makes the 8 in the 10,000ths. And then you can go on to from there, 100,000ths, millions, etc. Millionths. But you know you're on that side of the decimal because of the THS. Yeah? Okay. Well, if you understand place value, then rounding is an extremely easy process. Okay? Because they have to tell you first what you're rounding to. Then sometimes they tell you, like they want you to round to thousandths, but they could also say that thousandths is how many decimal places? How many? It's the third one over, so 3 decimal places, right? So they can tell you either by words or they can tell you by decimal places. So let's just look at the process or the steps for rounding. For rounding, step 1, identify the place value, also known as decimal place. DP is always decimal place. You're going to see that abbreviation a lot. You are rounding to. So the first thing is always to identify the decimal place you're rounding to. So I'm just going to put an example here. Say we have 14.3769. Who cares, right? All right. Now, let's say we're told to round this to the nearest hundredth, or that could be written as 2 DP, 2 decimal places. It means the same thing because hundredths are 2 decimal places. Okay, so you can see it written either way. Generally, we say it's rounded to so many decimal places, but they can tell you to round it to a specific place value. So the first thing we need to do is find out what number is in the place value we're rounding to. That's 2 decimal places, so that's our 7, yeah? Okay. Second, look to the right of that place. Rounding is always going to be determined by the number up to the right of that place, that digit. Okay? So you're looking at that specific digit. A digit just means the number, right? And there are two cases. If it's larger, okay, wait a minute, hold on, let me rewrite that. If it's 5 or larger, then round up. Add 1 to your digit. Now, and when I mean that digit, I mean the one you're rounding up, the one you're rounding to. Okay? Timer. All right. So, in this particular example that I have here, we're rounding the 7, right? That's where we want this decimal to stop. What is the digit immediately to the right of the 7? 6. Now, if rounding has been an issue for you in the past, I cannot stress how much circling the digit that you're looking at will make a difference in your life. Okay? So I always circle the one I'm thinking about. Is 6 5 or bigger? Yes. So that's going to mean that I'm going to round my 7 up or down? Up, which means simply add 1 to it. So that's going to give me 14.3 what? 8. Couldn't be any easier than that. Come on, right? So rounding, I don't know why we have rounding issues. It's not just you guys. I'm telling you, it happens all the way through university level. Okay. Now, second case. If it's less than 5. So the key is 5, right? If it's 5 or more, up. If it's less than 5, then you're going to round down. Or sometimes you'll hear it as round off. Okay? So in other words, that digit becomes a 0. And of course, everything after it. It's all just going to round off. So, say for example, we have 14.374.9. Again, rounding to the nearest hundredth or 2 decimal places. Always identify what number is in that place. And in this case, it's a 7. And I'm going to look immediately to the what? To the right of it. What digit is to the right of it? A 4. Now remember, our rounding rule says that if that digit is a 5 or more, it's going to add 1 to it. But is it 5 or more? No, so this time we're not going to round up, but round what? Down. So 14.37 won't change, and everything after it just becomes zeros. And since they become zeros, do I need to write them? No. So it just becomes 14.37. Okay? No other rules. Super simple. Now, there is one case that is a little odd that you need to be prepared for. Let's say I have the same thing, but this time it's 14.996. And again, I want to round to the nearest hundredths, in other words, 2 decimal places. What digit is in my place that I want to round to? The second 9. What's the digit immediately following it? The 6. So is it going to round up or down? Up. So that means I'm going to add 1 to my 9. But what happens when you add 1 to a 9? Well, yeah, it's going to turn into a 10, isn't it? Which, then when our rules, we always carry. So that means that 1 is going to round up there. So that's going to add 1 to that 9. And what happens when you add 1 to that 9? Yeah, it's going to do another 10. So that means you're going to be adding 1 to that. So you can see that there is a borrowing effect. Because if you take 14.99, okay, and we're going to add the 1 to that spot there, 9 and 1 make 10, carry the 1. 9 and 1 make 10, carry the 1. So what we end up with is 1,500. Do I need the zeros after the decimal? No. So the completed rounded number is 15. So you can't just take it off to the side and add the 1, and that's really clear what's happening. Or you could just take your calculator and put 14.99 plus. Now again, it's not really a 1 because you're adding it to that hundreds place. It's 1 what? If you're adding in the hundreds place, it's 1/100th, right? Because we're adding in that spot. If you want to enter your calculator to make sure that you don't make simple mistakes. Okay? So we're going to practice a lot of rounding today. But before we do that, we're going to look at a few things to do in the decimal book, in the decimal part of the book, just to remind you of some things about decimals, about where they lay, which one's bigger, right? Because it may say hundredths, but hundredths are smaller than tenths. And you know that because you're on the THS side, right? Okay, so it's a mirror image. So let's go to our book. Right, what are we on? We're on page 60 here. I'm sorry, that's not true. I've already gone past that. We're on page 57 here. Just looking at the introduction to decimal numbers. Okay? So a decimal number is simply a number that contains a decimal point. And all fractions, ladies, and all fractions can be turned into decimals. And for you, that just means pressing that decimal key. So they give you lots of different fractions here, and they write, and then they... All right, so you can write them in lots of different ways. Don't worry about this expanded form. Worry about this one, converting decimals to fractions. So all you're going to do to write it as a fraction, we don't have to do all this long division part. All we need to do is put 0.6 in our calculator and hit what? SD. And it'll return the simplified fraction. Right? Because 0.6 is really 6 over 10, but 6 over 10 will reduce to 3/5. So your calculator will automatically do the simplification for you. Okay? So all you have to do is enter it carefully. All right. Remember that we can put decimals on a number line. We can compare decimals and make sure to see which one's bigger by looking at each place value. And this might be something that you haven't done in a while. But say I have 0.234 and I have 0.24. If I want to see which one's bigger, I just compare numbers from the left to the right. Well, zeros are the same, so I can't tell anything from that. The 2's are the same, so I can't tell anything from that. The 3, which one's bigger, 3 or 4? 4. So that means that's the bigger decimal. Even though the other one has another digit, we don't care, right? We just compare them going to the right until we get to the biggest digit, and that's automatically the bigger decimal. Because this 4 does not mean that it's 234, it's 234 thousandths. So it's very tiny. It's getting smaller, not bigger, right? Because it's beyond the decimal. If you were comparing these two numbers and the decimal was there, obviously that one's bigger, right? But the rules change as we start using decimals. We have to remember that as we go to the right, the number is actually getting smaller, okay? So be careful. All right. Now, so you can place decimals on the number line. Remember, there are going to have positives and negatives, and all negatives are smaller than what? All positives. There you go. So I'm going to have you just practice just writing these as fractions in simplest form. So you just get out your calculators, and I'm going to call on you, and you're going to tell me the answer. So that one. So this one asks you to round to significant figures. When you're doing that, all you need to do is you're simply going to just find the first 3 numbers, whatever they are. Okay? So 3 significant figures on number 4. The first 3 numbers are 5, 2, 3, right? So it's just going to have a 5 and a 2. But I need to see if I run around that 3, because everything else is going to go away. What's the number immediately after the 3? 7. So what's that going to do to my 3? Turn it into a 4. So my completed answer to 3 significant digits is 5.24. So if it says 3 significant digits, that means the first 3 digits are the only ones you're going to have, and everything else goes away. But you need to make sure you round it. You can't just drop them off. So here. 37.1356 to 3 significant digits. means 37 point. There, this is the digit that I'm going to be rounding to. What's immediately after it?
3.
So is that going to change my 1? No, all that stuff is just going to bounce off or drop off, and I'm going to get 37.1. What if it said 4 significant digits? Just means round to the first 4 numbers, whatever they are. Okay? Now, all of these are decimals. If you were doing this with whole numbers, though, say you had like 6, 0, 1, 2, 5, okay, and this was a whole number. If you rounded this to 3 significant digits, that's right there. So the 2 after it is going to round off. But notice that I have some decimal places before the I have some place values before the decimal. So on that one, you wouldn't be allowed to just drop the numbers off. You're only allowed to drop numbers off if they're on the other side, if they're on to the right of the decimal. If they're on the left, you need to make sure you keep some the place values. You just won't use any digits there other than zeros, so hold those values. I don't know that they're going to do that to you. They don't in this homework, but just to be sure, right? Place values onto the left of 0 never disappear. The place values don't, but the numbers can be rounded, okay? All right, so let's look at this because you have an assignment. Your assignment is going to begin on page 59, 3C.2, and you can do 1 through 7, okay? So 3C.2, 1 through 7. It's on page 59. Okay? And I'll find the answers for you so that you can flip back and forth to those page numbers. Remember, all you have to do is type the page number in the bottom to go to from the answer to the work. So you will need your own computer now, guys, or share, because there's not room for me to do the whole thing.